So in this segment, or I guess in the next week, we're going to be talking about a lot about the Dominic Cummings stuff. I know I'm a bit late to the party considering this happened last week, but I feel like it's important to talk about. And what we're going to do is just kind of space kind of each of the some of the important statements that he's made, and some of the stuff I found really interesting, such as his comments on Laura Kuenssberg and also his reference to the infamous Spider-Man meme, which we'll be talking about in a few days, mainly because it made me laugh and it's worth just covering for the banter element. Most of the news we cover is depressing, so we've got to have some fun once in a while. It's only logical, as Mr. Spock would say. So yeah, this is kind of Dominic Cummings putting a lot of importance onto the BBC, and it's obvious why, and we'll talk about that towards the end of the video. So let's hear what Mr. Cummings had to say.
I was working, say, roughly 100-hour weeks. Of that time, less than an hour a week for sure, less than 1%, much less than 1% was spent talking to the media. I did occasionally talk to people. The main person, really, though, that I spoke to in the whole of 2020 was Laura Kuenssberg at the BBC.
So Laura Kuenssberg, for anyone who doesn't know, is the chief political correspondent for the BBC. She's kind of the top when it comes to correspondence, top correspondent. So that's the reason why Dominic Cummings specifically spoke to Laura Kuenssberg, and there's different reasons you can kind of think about as to why he would be so close to someone like Laura Kuenssberg, and that's something we'll talk about in a few minutes.
Because the BBC has a special position in the country, obviously during a crisis, and because I was in the room for certain crucial things, I could give guidance to her on certain very big stories. For example, I'll give you an example of the sort of thing I did. On the 18th, the Wednesday, the 18th of March, huge rumours spread that there was going to be a London-only lockdown, and pictures started appearing in some of the media and websites about tanks encircling the M25 and cutting it off and whatnot. Laura Kuenssberg called me and said, "This story is happening. Is it true?" I said, "I can categorically tell you it's definitely not true. You should definitely not report it. I absolutely 100% guarantee it." And that meant that the BBC did not, like some of the media did, run the story. So but that was really very occasional. I spoke to her maybe on average once every 3 or 4 weeks through the course of the year.
Okay. So look, Laura Kuenssberg often published this quote unquote sources words verbatim. Government source says this, or Downing Street source says this, etc. We know that most likely it was Dominic Cummings. So she offered no critical analysis when she put these statements out. And so the reason why Dominic Cummings had direct lines to these people, Laura Kuenssberg and Robert Peston, is because he used them as, spokespeople for the Conservative Party, for Boris Johnson and for himself, where he could put out statements in the press which made it look like it was official and these things were happening properly. For example, him talking about this tank story, but at the same time we know that he also used the press to deflect from the Barnard Castle story, which is something we'll talk about here. So source says his trip within the guidelines, as Cummings went to stay with his parents so they could help with childcare whilst he and his wife were ill. They insist no breach of lockdown. So Dominic Cummings insisted that Dominic Cummings did not break the lockdown rules, which we know he did because this was a non-essential trip. We also know that Laura Kuenssberg replied to the one of the correspondents, Pippa something, from the Daily Mirror within about half an hour. So in the space of half an hour, she managed to get onto the phone with Dominic Cummings. So first of all, she would have to have seen the tweet, got on the phone to Dominic Cummings, and then tweeted this out verbatim. Source says his trip was within the guidelines, as Cummings went to stay with his parents so they could help with childcare and blah, blah, blah. This is not factoring in the Barnard Castle bit, the trip at the end. But the reason why, Laura Kuenssberg is so... was so close with someone like Dominic Cummings is that's how she got access. She got all these statements, all these exclusives from Dominic Cummings, the interviews as well. That's how she would have got approval to do her role. And the thing is, as Frankie Boyle points out here, if you're a political journalist who has regular contact with people in power and your analysis is always aligned with prevailing orthodoxy, then you're not really a journalist, you're a courtier. I would say you're just a spokesperson at that point, because that's what you are. You're quoting things verbatim. If you're a person who just quotes other people, what are you? You're just a person who's reading out what someone else has said. That's all she was, and that's a lot of the things where she would often use Conservative Party framing on specific things such as the economy and spending. She would quote Dominic Cummings verbatim. She's not very critical of the government because she needs access to them. That's how she gets the interviews. That's how she's interviewed Boris Johnson so often. The same thing with Robert Peston. He is a bit more critical of the government at times, but it's not that great. You know, he's ITV's senior guy, isn't he? So if you think about it like this, you know, you've got the senior correspondent at the BBC in your pocket. You've got the senior correspondent at ITV in your pocket. You know, your life's pretty easy. Because anything, they'll ask you, you know, they'll call you and be like, look, you know, we've heard this story, is it true? All you have to say is no, and they'll be like, okay, cool. And, you know, he'll give them a statement to write and to say about what's happened. No, source says his trip was within guidelines as, you know, he was ill and there was no breach of lockdown. That's Dominic Cummings vindicating himself, you know, and the Conservative government, you know, flew behind Dominic Cummings and really protected him, but at the same time, so did the media. For the most part, apart from The Guardian and The Mirror, who actually did great work around Dominic Cummings breaking the lockdown rules, how many other people actually really dug into this? If you had listened to the BBC or ITV, Dominic Cummings did no wrong. And, you know, that's the reason why he kind of was so close with Laura Kuenssberg and, you know, Robert Peston, is because they needed access to, you know, him to get exclusive interviews and things like that and statements that other people couldn't get. That's why they're kept around by their respective media organisations, because they get the exclusives. If you get the exclusives, where are people going to go? To the places where they can get news quickly. And in return, you know, they would offer very uncritical analysis of the Conservative Party government, of things like Brexit, of the COVID response, of Boris Johnson personally. That's the reason why. It's access. You know, and that's one of the things I think Chomsky spoke about, where he said state media can be more, private media can be more subservient to the state because they need access, they need interviews and things like that. That's why the best kind of news shows are the ones that don't rely on interviews and access with politicians, because then they can be as critical as they want, and if the politicians don't come on their show, then they still can do a show. You know, if I can't interview people for my show, it doesn't bother me that much, because it's mainly just me talking about interviews other people have done, or, you know, news articles. But if your show predominantly is hinged on getting politicians or, you know, senior journalists and etc., and if you're very critical of certain people, they ain't going to come on your show. And if they do come on your show, they're going to just attack you. That's the reason why they're so nice. You know, the Peston and Kuenssberg are so nice to Dominic Cummings, Boris Johnson, and that kind of group of people, because if they're not nice, they won't get access. But we're going to call this series Red Dom Redemption after the Red Dead series. There's going to be a lot more of these clips. Most of these are from the press hearing, but I did want to state this really funny meme from this guy, Jason, where it's like Laura Kuenssberg reporting on the Dominic Cummings drama. It's pretty funny. It made me laugh a lot. But, you know, the simple fact is Laura Kuenssberg was a spokesperson for Dominic Cummings for the most part. Same with Peston. You know, I don't know who the new Downing Street sources are, but, you know, right now, you know, instead of her phrasing it as source says, she often says, you know, Downing Street source says, so we don't know who that person is. But, you know, they probably aren't as in the know as, you know, Dominic Cummings was. Dominic Cummings essentially was, you know, the brain for Boris Johnson. You know, he would authorise press releases and stuff like that. Dominic Cummings was very powerful. His downfall was mainly down to the fact that he was at loggerheads with Boris Johnson's fiancée. But anyways, look, I'm going to leave it there. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Like, comment, share, subscribe, and hopefully I'll see you in the next one.